My name is Bob Wondrock. I'm with the South Central Wisconsin Division of the National Model Railroad Association, of which I've been a member since 1973. I joined the Model Railroad Club in La Mesa, California, and they had a small layout in the upstairs of an old fire hall in La Mesa. And since that time, they built a little bit larger layout in the San Diego Railroad Museum. You may have seen it in magazines. I think it's like 6,500 square feet, this gigantic thing. Anyway, I've been a model railroader for as long as I can remember. This particular presentation I've done a few times over the years, and I occasionally update it with some of the images as technology changes and my layouts have changed. Things that I'm going to be talking about today, and I appreciate comments until the end because this will take me about an hour to go through. And if I don't keep yapping as I normally do, we're going to be covering taking and finding photos, photo software, manipulating photos, measuring needed backgrounds, expanding an image, an item I call photo kit bashing, combining the images, preparation for printing. Most of the time I have it professionally printed, and how I get the image printed and how I attach it. And lastly, something I just added in the last year is the use of AI images. Now, I am not an artist. My background is I was a broadcast engineer for 34 years. And so I've got that part of my brain developed and not the artistic side. And, many times I went to conventions, nationals and regionals, and I sat in on clinics given by people that are saying, hey, I'll show you how to paint your own backdrop. And I get in there and I watch these guys, and I said, boy, that's simple. I could probably do that when I get home. And then I find out that a lot of these guys have artistic backgrounds, and they're like this guy that used to be on PBS who would do a whole background presentation in a half an hour. And that just never worked for me. Using photos as backdrops is not something that is new. This picture is from John Allen's Gory and Defeated layout. It was probably taken in the mid-60s. And if you look carefully here, and here, and over here, those are probably cutouts from magazines that John hand-colored. And then we've got this building here, and this building that are more three-dimensional, but they're photos of another building on John's layout that he printed up, folded on the seams to give it a little bit more depth, and then placed it in the background. I started out taking photos with my Nikon camera, single lens reflex, but pictures can also be taken with smaller cameras if you still have them, and cell phones. Cell phones got pretty good cameras, and what you need to do is use the raw or highest quality setting before you take the photos. You want as many bits in that image as possible. I suggest not using the wide angle setting on a camera or phone because you get a wide angle distortion so that the picture seems to be leaning to the right on the right and leaning to the left on the left side, although you could probably just cut those parts out, but that gets a little bit more complicated. as I said, you want to get the most bits you want out of pictures, and you can find a lot of pictures on the internet. When downloading an online image, get the most bits you can. You want to look for something like that, and getting an image that's as close to and exceeding 1 megabyte. That's my rule that I use. Because once you start expanding that image, if it's didn't have enough bits in it, it starts to deteriorate, get fuzzy. And you also want to keep an eye on, you see these little white dots here, that's watermarks. A lot of posts on the internet will use watermarks so you don't use their photos without their permission. However, if you're just going to use it on your layout, you can use just about anything you can find. This is how I started with photo manipulation. This particular program, Photo Deluxe by Adobe, was on a computer that I bought back in 2002. It was one of these programs that was included for free. This is a predecessor of Photoshop, but it uses, at that time, and why I'm using these slides, it uses almost the same procedures as Photoshop, except Photoshop has got a lot more bells and whistles. Now, I began with this thing, learning how to use it, and I used it to hand color black and white photos and do some other manipulation of photos, and I thought, well, maybe I can use it for model railroading. Now I use Photoshop Elements, which is a little pared down version of Photoshop. And besides creating backdrops, I've used it for creating birthday and anniversary cards and Christmas cards. Now this particular software costs, I think I paid $129 for it. And if you're not up to doing that, if you've never used Photoshop, you might want to try this. This is a free manipulation program called GIMP. It's GIMP.org. And I've never used it myself, but I've been told it's usable. And a lot of these programs are very similar in nature. And if you want to try without spending a lot of money, this might be your route. I started really in earnest looking at backdrops based on this article written by Rick Johnson of the Model Railroader staff, where he decided he was going to make some backdrops for the Milwaukee, Racine, and Troy layout, which used to be in the Kalmbach building in Waukesha, Wisconsin. And he created this up here with the river. It's the Milwaukee River going through Milwaukee and some of the buildings that are on the near north side along the river. And he blended, or actually the staff there blended this in nicely with some three-dimensional buildings. This scene was seen, the first thing you'd look at is you came into the layout room at Kalmbach. I saw this layout a couple of times. Unfortunately, not much of it has been saved. Here he shows how he's attaching multiple images into one image. With Photoshop, you can use a procedure called distort and straighten out buildings that kind of keystone like this, and just pulled it back up, used a grid pattern, and did a nice square vertical and horizontal building. Now I'm going to go over some of the early photos and how I developed backdrops. This goes back good 15 years. I went out one day with the camera and went along the rail corridor in Madison, Wisconsin, looking for old buildings that I could take pictures. And I spotted this old one with a ghost sign on it, which says International Harvester Company of America. And I thought, yeah, I could use this. So I got that and several other photos. And I really had it printed by Staples, which is a business products store. I don't know if they have it out east or not, but they're common around here. And because it's a large photo, I couldn't print it on my printer. And I attached it to a backdrop that I had, which was just sky blue. And I actually put it in a spot that, well, I thought in case it doesn't turn out so people don't look at it very, very often. And once I got it up, I thought, oh, it does look okay. I'm going to try another one. This was another photo I took that day when I was along the rail corridor. Had that printed up and stuck it next to the other one. Occasionally I'd go down to Milwaukee, and on the south side of Milwaukee there are a lot of old buildings. I'm not sure if this one even exists anymore. So this picture goes back 15, 18 or more years. The thing I liked about it, that it had built-in weathering. I didn't have to worry about weathering anything. Although I didn't like this pole here, I didn't like the first floor, so I thought maybe I can make something of this. And I did. I combined multiple images, which I'll go into a little bit later and how I do that. If you notice, this open window here, here, and here, that's the same image. It's actually 3 images. And then I added some overhead door photos that I had taken from another building. This was along the rail corridor too, and I thought, well, I'll take this picture. The exposure wasn't quite good, but I could correct that with Photoshop, and it was a plausible background photo on one of my branch lines. A lot of these photos are on a layout that doesn't exist anymore. Then I went down to the Amtrak depot in Milwaukee. I thought maybe I'd find something there. And this building was directly across the street. And I thought, well, that's kind of odd. And that's as close as I could get to getting a decent picture of it. And I thought, oh, this is a little more challenging. So I straightened it out a little bit. And that went on my backdrop. So that's a third building I put there. And I'll go into how I did that specifically in a few minutes. How I manipulate photos. Well, let's go back to Photo Deluxe here, or if you're using Photoshop. It kind of works the same way. First of all, open your image. And there it is. It's a little bit more challenging than to have just a nice squared up photo. But any artist has got to have a larger canvas to work on, so you increase the canvas size because you have to push this thing off. Remember I talked about Rick Johnson using a distort feature. That is when you can grab a corner like this and pull it up so it looks like this. Now it's getting to be nice straight and up and down. I didn't use at the time a feature called grid, which gives you a nice grid pattern so you can line up the verticals and the horizontals. I use that in later ones, but I was so excited that this was beginning to look decent that I didn't do that. And because some of this is not usable, I trimmed off everything and just grabbed one of the panels. And I thought, okay, I can make something out of this. And I wanted to cut that away. Then again, expand the canvas so you have enough room to do what you need to do. And what did I need to do? I copied and pasted two exact same images. And so I have 3 images, and I'm going to push them together. And you just grab and move them closer together. Now, if I was to adjust anything like the color or the brightness, if I tried it, only one of them would work. So with Photoshop Elements, they have what they call layers. Every image is a different layer. So how do I control everything at once? I combine them, called merge function, and then I can adjust the brightness, the contrast, the color. If I want to put a sign on it, I can do that then. And while we're talking about layering, go to one that I did on my most recent layout that has multiple layers. I was creating a lake scene where pulpwood would be floated and brought up and put into gondola cars. So I found this online. Excuse me, I'm going to sip a little water here. I had to flip this horizontally. Then I found online some pulpwood rafts in water, and I combined them with a tug scene. Now, this whole scene that I was trying to create here was actually about 44 inches wide. This is just a portion of it as I was putting it together. Oops. And I added a foreground scene in the water. This guy is called a poker, who poked these logs in so that they could get onto an elevator and eventually into gondolas. When I had this whole image created on Photoshop, I printed out 4 8.5 by 11 black and white graphs just to make sure everything looked okay and nothing was really out of place. This was done before I took it down and had it printed. These things cost, the last price I got from Staples was $6 a square foot. And speaking of that, if you're going to have something commercially printed, make the smallest overall image as possible. I mean, everything fitted into a small area. Don't have a lot of white space in it. The reason being is you pay for all this white space because they charge you, they take this measurement, multiply it by this measurement, and calculate how many square feet it is. And then they'll charge you. In this case, I wanted to have 3 different images because I can only handle maybe 22 or 24 inches at a time, and I didn't want to have a seam in the lake here. Now, if you notice here, this tree here is here too, and this tree here is here. Now, when I put these things together, I start on my right side, I put this image on, then I put this image on, and I have to trim this so that I can get a 1/4 inch overlap here. On some of my first photos that I put on backdrops, I had the image shrunk a little bit, the paper shrunk, and there's little blue lines in between. With the lap of 1/4 of an inch that matches, you don't notice that, and if there's any shrinkage, it's not apparent. And this is what the scene looked like when I put up the 3 pieces. The seams are, one of them is right here, and the other one is over here. And this was when I completed the scene with the foreground, what it looks like. I wrote an article that appeared in Railroad Model Craftsman in December of 2024. I have another clinic that I've done that tells about the actual log loading and how this is done in a prototypical, in prototype form. Now, some of the images you can print at home. They're small ones, under 8.5 by 11. But I found that the printers at Staples, those professional wide platen printer, the images look a lot better. I think it's probably a laser printer. But they can do up to 36-inch wide prints. And I also have it done on heavy-duty matte paper. And the reason is you don't want them shiny. And I attach them with 3M Super 77 spray adhesive. And there's a trick to this in case you make a mistake and you get one corner and it's in the wrong position. Instead of pressing the whole thing on or trying to yank it off, have a small hairdryer nearby and put it on medium heat, heat up that attached portion, and gradually peel it away. It will liquefy the glue, and you probably have to put another coating on your backdrop before you reapply it. As I said, it's very sticky, and I recommend using a wallpaper roller to smooth out the backdrop, make sure you don't have any bubbles or anything else on it, and everything is attached. Although the last few I attached just using my hands. And that's where you really have to be careful, because you get some of this glue on your fingertips and you don't want to touch the surface of the image because it'll pull the image off. So, and you don't want white spots. I pushed in using the heel of my hand to smooth things out. One guy that I've been following and has been an inspiration for doing photos on a laminate structure was Lance Mintheim. I saw him a few years ago in a clinic, and then this article appeared a year ago about how he takes photos offline many times from Google Street View, and he laminates them to a box or whatever size building that he wants that really looks like the original building because it's a photo of the original building. And how he makes two-dimensional look three-dimensional is adding things like this. These shields here, the particular loading dock here. I don't know, these are vents here. And I thought, geez, you know, maybe I can do this too. And one time I created a styrene shape here of a building, and instead of painting it, I laminated images. The top here is obviously shingles that I found online, shake shingles, and I wanted some old decrepit siding. And I found some really good image of that, and I just sprayed it and wrapped it around and then cut out the windows, which were already holes in the styrene. The background trees here are pine trees that I found online. This whole article about how I did this portion of my layout is in the July 2025 Model Railroader. Installing backdrops on a depot project. Now this goes back 14, 15 years on my previous layout. I had a junction scene here that I was never quite pleased with. I just had a Tyco building there and some sedum trees that I'd had for years, and thought, well, I want to build a junction depot eventually, which I did. But at the time, I didn't have AI images, so I found this to give the scene a little bit more depth as a building that looked like a line-side structure. These pictures of trees I've had for a long time. When I first went out taking photos, I got a lot of trees, so I can always find different trees on my layout. I made an error here early on, and because I learned how to use Photoshop better, I would, if I was doing this scene over again, bring those trees down to the ground level. Here I've got grass that really doesn't blend in, but I'm learning as I go along. On the other side of the junction track, more images of trees that I had printed up, just sizing them, seeing what works. Then I put this depot in, which is a model, kind of a pared down model of a junction depot in Cameron, Wisconsin, that no longer exists. And I wanted to test things with the foreground structure before I actually glued these trees on here. Then I added the trees and one depot building, hotel building that I had. And that's about how much I completed. Planted some trees on the other side using some of the old sedum trees in the background and the better super trees in the foreground. And now I have a 14-inch deep scene. The engine, which I no longer have, was a permanent fixture there to kind of block off the backdrop where the track just runs right into the backdrop. Now, I did rebuild that scene on my existing layout, and this is how it looks. Oh, excuse me. That's what it looked before I left. It had the layout torn up back in 2018. It just didn't have too much detail on it. But this is how the scene looks now. I actually added an outbuilding here on the other side based on a prototypic picture. Now, you've seen roads and tracks go off in the distance on backdrops. People use that often. Excuse me for some more water. Felt like I was going to... I did sneeze, sorry. There's a thing called parallax error. So if you walk by here, the end of the road or the rails tends to move back and forth. You can fix that by putting things in the way. I actually had put more trees over here. Sorry. Just have a little irritation in my throat. As I said, you can fix that so that when you walk by here, you don't see the back of the tracks moving left and right. I want to check my time, make sure I'm okay. This is about halfway through, and this tells me that I seem to be right on time. I'm going to talk a little bit about kit bashing photos of buildings. When I was in my trip down to the south side of Milwaukee, I also spotted this photo. Matter of fact, it was right across the street from that old gray brick building that I had used in a previous backdrop. I liked the ghost sign here, and this much looked okay. I didn't like the first floor, or this part right here. So I took some of my brick picture, which I took that was not too far away, just the side of the building, and I created this backdrop. I did this, so this is probably in the 10 to 15 years old. First of all, I created the brick pattern and stamped in all these windows, just copying one and just saying paste, 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 paste. I used a grid on this, obviously. And then I put this sign, the ghost sign in. Now, speaking of signs, you can make all kinds of digital signs online. You don't have to find a sign that's true to prototype. You can create just about anything. And you don't have to create them separately. You can put it right on a building. Now, this building I took a shot, and I didn't like the signs. They were too modern for me. I modeled the early 50s. So I just went and took a big square over here. I selected it, copied it, pasted it over this sign, and then I created a digital sign overlay over this whole part, and it became a background building. And I faded the lettering on this so that you could see the brick through. I also created this sign, and these early ones are so-so. I could do a lot better than that, but I learned as I went along. But this was a flat that I used in my city of Barron, B-A-R-R-O-N on my layout. Now, on that particular building and another one, I was manipulating photos of existing buildings on my layout. I had this one, and you'll see this later when we get to talking about AI, but I took this picture and I said, well, I don't want to have to spend money to get all these design preservation panels here. And I thought, well, maybe I could just make a photo flat. So I took that picture, measured it, made sure I could get the right size on the final print, and I created a bigger building. And I used the picture of the overhead doors and planted that in these openings here. On the original building, I only had one of these, so now I've got 4. I also tried this with my grain elevator here, but there's a little bit of a color shift when I printed it out at home. And I wanted to make it look like it was a much bigger complex here. The main line tracks actually run in between these. And if you see this right here, this is actually a drain from my kitchen sink. When my house was built, I told these guys, the plumbers, to hide this in the wall. and they decided they were going to put it outside the wall, so it actually ran down the middle of this silo here. Now you can also manipulate commercial products. There are a lot of good commercial products out there for backdrops, although I don't use clouds at all as a rule, because my backdrops are 18-inch high hardboard painted blue, and it would be much more difficult to try to cover that whole area, so I nix the clouds. But when you get a commercial product that's got buildings on it, and you want to use those buildings in a different way or recolor them, scan them in sections and save them in a file, because you can always use them again. And I've done that several times. I had this realistic backgrounds product I had bought in an estate sale. One of the guys in our division died, and they were selling his stuff off. I thought, oh, this would be a good way to start with photo backdrops. And I had it was about a 6-foot section that I wanted to cover. And I thought, oh, how am I going to do this? This backdrop was only 3.5 feet long. So I thought, well, I'll scan these buildings and change them a little bit. So here's one, and this is actually in downtown Pittsburgh. You do a Google Earth, you'll see this picture in this building in downtown Pittsburgh. I thought, okay, I'll take a picture of that, but I don't want to use the same thing with, 4 feet away. And so I reversed it horizontally and recolored it, and now it's a building on the other end of this backdrop. And I called it Hank Brown Towers, named after the former member of the SCWD who had passed away. And I also scanned this building here, reversed it, gave it a slightly different color, and glued it over here. I also learned that to make these buildings stand out a little bit better, color the edges. I used a Sharpie on this one, but I color it from the back side so that I don't accidentally slip and take the Sharpie down the front here. My wife has got some watercolor markers, various colors, and I use them for around when I put trees up. Otherwise, what you're going to see on anything that's cut out is white, and you don't want to show white edges. This is what that whole scene looks like, and I'm cheating here. Just for this particular photo, I've added clouds and the sun via Photoshop. If you actually saw the scene, this is just all blue here. But here's the original photo that I scanned, and here it is over here. Here's the original photo that I scanned, cut out the middle, reversed it, stuck it over here. And again, I scanned this one and pasted it there. So that goes completely across the area that I was wanting to cover. I got a little issue with something that I had published in Model Railroader, because this location on my previous layout is called Minneapolis. The guy that manufactured the backdrop got a hold of the editor of Model Railroader and says, "That's not Minneapolis, that's Pittsburgh." So, okay, I'm using it the way I want to use it. Another thing you can do, fill in spots. I took a photo of this building to fill in a spot here. I did a little photoshopping on it. It isn't quite the same color, but it fills in a spot, making the building look a lot bigger than it actually is. I use trees a lot on my layout. And these are photos that I took in central Wisconsin some years back, but I can continue to use the photos of trees and everything else I've taken anytime I want. I can make them bigger, I can make them smaller. I had this for years. This is sold by Walthers, and it's actually a drawing of a backdrop. And I had this as when I had first decided to fill in spots. I had this on hand, and I thought I'll stick it in there. It looks appropriate for a lumber company. I don't do that anymore. The thing about creating these photo backdrops on your own is that they're unique to your layout. Nobody else is going to have anything that looks like it because you created it. Here's one of my big problems. I mentioned before that I sat in on how to paint backdrops, and I thought I could do it. And I got home, and I have this 9-foot stretch here that's 7.5 inches high because my upper level of my layout was up here. I thought, boy, I saw this guy do it. I can do it. And I tried, and it looked like hell when I was done. I just didn't like it at all. And after about a year, I thought, okay, I'm more confident using Photoshop. And I've got pictures of trees, and what looks better than pictures of trees, I use pictures of real trees. And I thought, well, also in this case, because it's 7.5 inches high, I can break my rule about adding clouds. And so I had this 9-foot piece of backdrop by 7.5 inches printed, and I attached them. And there's my clouds, and you can see the top of where the cloud's edge here. That was the only place on my previous layout that I had clouds. I'm going to take you through some of my current layout. My last layout was about 25 by 25, the HO scale. My current layout is 8 by 30, point to point. As you come down the stairs, this is the scene you see. Here are my trees again, filling in nicely behind here. I did use a rock formation here. There's a tunnel portal goes in, comes out the other side to the main portion of my layout. Over here I used several images. These buildings here are actually pictures of these. Then I added some people on the sidewalk here. This road and that tree is from Google Earth of a location about 2 miles north of where I'm sitting. And I added a car on there. The trees here are ones that I had shot up in central Wisconsin. I used trees to fill in. This is a 1 foot by 8 foot branch line which ends about 2 feet beyond the right here, as my layout is point to point. So I used the trees in the backdrop all the way to the end here. On the main portion of the layout, this building here was a street view shot of a warehouse on the south side of Milwaukee that I thought was very appropriate. And I had to straighten it out because you can imagine an 8-story structure with a photo taken from ground level, there's a lot of keystoning. So I stretched it out and I added a sign. My signs look a lot better than what I did on my last layout. This building here was a dilapidated structure that I found online, and I have more of my trees here, but I made them smaller to show a little distance there. This is a picture you only see a very little bit of it, of a potato warehouse that I found in central Wisconsin. I'm going to show you beginning and end now. When I showed you that part that was Dallas, Wisconsin, on the other side of the layout, that's on the other side of this backdrop here. The tracks actually come through just a little bit to the right here. But this is Minneapolis on my layout. Tracks going to a passenger shed here. These tracks coming into the yard. I have inbound, outbound, and then a passing siding. I had I think it was a 7.5 foot area here, because my layout is only 8 feet wide here. And I had multiple images I had to put together. And when I composed the backdrop, I cut it out into pieces. Actually, I had it printed in pieces and just tacked it up before I actually did the final cutting out, just to make sure everything looked okay and fit and overlapped properly. And then I came to this building and I thought, oh man, that doesn't look right. So I physically cut it out. And that was unusual because that's actually the Soo Line building. I'm a Soo Line modeler. That was the Soo Line building that still exists in Minneapolis, although it's not called the Soo Line building anymore because there ain't no Soo Line. This is what the completed scene looks like. Now, here's a Pittsburgh building that I had. I said I scanned and saved. Here's some others from that commercial vendor. This picture here is actually of downtown Minneapolis. Although somebody with a sharp eye, and nobody's complained yet, would notice the IDS building here. And that wasn't built yet in the early 1950s, but nobody's noticed. And these again, some of them are from the commercial vendor. The railroad yard here, I was lucky enough to find a 1942 color shot of the Milwaukee Road Yard in Bensonville, Illinois. Although it wasn't this long, so I had to use it multiple times. This yellow car here, this yellow car here, this yellow car here, and here. That's all the same image. And when I multiplied the image and I tapered it, give it a little bit of depth here, there were seams here, and these cars did not go together very well. So I covered them up a little bit with some trees. And that was all on the backdrop. So how do I blend it in up front? I get some trees, super trees, that are similar color and put those along the front. Now this shot practically nobody sees, but as I was putting this together before I placed the passenger building here in place, I had a blue section right here. And I thought, I got to put something there. So I used some of that brick wall again that I found on the south side of Milwaukee. And I added some posters for the 3 different railroads that use the depot in Minneapolis, the Milwaukee Road, Soo Line, and the Rock Island. And then some posters here, I put some doors in, some people. There's a couple over here, you can't really see it, that are kissing each other goodbye. Don't know which one is leaving or not. The other end of this, you can't actually see this image unless you remove my engine house in Minneapolis. So that's what I did to take this shot. I model very loosely Ashland, Wisconsin, which is on the southern edge of Lake Superior. And they have a really nice depot up there, which used to be a Union Depot between the Soo Line. It was actually built by the pre-1909 Wisconsin Central, but by the Soo Line and the Northern Pacific. Unfortunately, in 2000, I had a big fire. And this, I don't have an image of what it looked like, but this whole roofing area here collapsed inward. They have since redone this building, and I've got this picture. This is pre-2000. I wanted to use it on my layout, but I couldn't use it on backdrop flat. So first of all, what I did on Photoshop is remove the late 20th century images like these cars, this tree, the light poles, the handicap sign, the stop sign here, and I pasted it to a piece of foam core, and this is what it looks like now on my layout. And I described what I did here in the July 2025 model railroader. And these two tracks here are operationally miles apart. This is where I fit two branch lines in a matter of 1 foot by 8 foot. You can see some of what went on the backdrop here. And this is more for logging. This would have been Reserve, Wisconsin, which is a big logging area. Here's some more of my trees that I used. I also have Duluth on my layout. My main line runs between Minneapolis and Duluth, Minnesota. But it runs through northwest Wisconsin. I had this image. That was the best color image I had, but it did not have enough bits because when I tried expanding the image, this was just no detail of brick at all. And I thought, oh, I gotta fix that somehow. So what I did is I cut out electronically all the brick. And my wife had some craft paper that had brick pattern on it. And I scanned that and I cut appropriate pieces and pasted it in. Now I added a few more things to it before I glued this to my foam core again, cut that out, and now it's my Duluth depot. Now I want to back up for just a second here. You can see this building right here. This building does not exist anymore in real life. This is a parking lot in a hotel now. But this depot right there is home to a railroad museum, and they run live steam out of it. So if you ever get to Duluth, Minnesota, go to that museum. They've got some very nice preserved steam locomotives there, including the big Duluth, Mesabi, and Iron Range Malleys. Well, they're not Malleys, they're compound engines, not compound engines. Another thing I wanted for my Duluth area was backdrop photos of Duluth, old ones, because I modeled the early 50s. Well, I went to the archives, online, of the University of Minnesota Duluth, and I found this image, and it was 9.5 megabytes. And I thought, boy, that's plenty of bits to use. But I didn't want to use the whole thing. It was a panorama print, so you get a lot of distortion here. I thought, well, I maybe want these buildings right here. So I undistorted them in in Photoshop, and I hand colored both the cars and the buildings. I'll hand colored using Photoshop. And then I added some trees in front just to cover that seam. And this is how it looks now on my layout. Let's talk a little bit about AI. First started in 2003 when my son said, "Hey Dad, you got to take a look at some of these AI images you can make." And he sent one, it was really kind of goofy, of a big rodent, and it had a Viking helmet on. And it just did a wonderful job of that. It was as goofy as it was. And I said, "Steve, maybe I can use this for model railroading. So what I did, I started fooling around with that and seeing what kind of images I could come up with. And at the same time, a friend of mine in town here said, say, Bob, I don't really have a computer, if you can believe that. And he said, I need a 7.5 foot backdrop, photo backdrop made, but it's mostly all trees. And I thought, oh, I can do that. You know, it doesn't take long. I've got all kinds of trees that I can use as images. And so I made that for him. He took it down to Staples, had it printed up, and put it on his backdrop. And then a couple of weeks after that, he comes to me and says, Bob, I've got a 12.5 foot area that I need to cover. And he said, I would like it with buildings on it. And I thought, oh boy, okay, John, I will work on it. It may take a while. So I created it, and by the time I was done, I thought, oh, this would make a good article, and so did RMC. And you can see it in the October 2024 issue. Remember that building I said I copied and made it multi-story? Here's the image of that, of the one that I created. And I thought, I don't want it 4 stories, so I made it 3 stories. There's a couple of other things. This I found online. All the rest of these are created by Microsoft Designer. This was done, again, 3 years ago. And at that time, I thought, boy, you know, I said, give me a 1920s downtown. And this is what it printed up. And I thought, oh, that's kind of neat. Maybe I can use that sometime. Haven't used it yet. And I said, give me a 1950s downtown. And this is what it did. At that time, AI generators had real problems with wording and signs. You can take a close look. These signs look ridiculous. And whatever, you know, I don't know if it's in Klingon or what. But it did a nice job when I asked for a 1938 Dodge pickup. 1946 Chevy sedan, but I don't remember that they had wood back doors. But they did a real nice job on other images that I'd requested. Here's some of the things that I did for John's 12.5 foot section. I said, give me a produce store, and it gave me this. It didn't spell produce right. It didn't spell anything nice in here. It had too many people on. Now, I physically, on Photoshop, had to remove every one of these images. And I created this over here, added these images inside, and again, used multiple layers here. We talked about layers before. And this was the easiest thing to do. I just had to remove that eye in there and slide this over. Here's a car here. I'm not sure if this was a Chevy or what here. Guys that are good at identifying cars could probably identify it for me. But you'll see multiple layers in this. You see, you know, some of my trees in the background, some grass that I had as a photo. Here's some of that brick wall I stuck in between here. This one really started out goofy. On the left side here, I got this image. I says, I want an old auto parts store. Okay. Well, let's get this thing up here. Now, what the heck is this? And all the signs are kind of goofy too. So I thought, well, they kind of look like a lion's head. So I found an image of a lion's head online and called it Lionhead Auto Parts. And here's a guy that I called the Scuzzy Man. I asked early on, give me a Scuzzy Man image. It's kind of like a Where's Waldo image. And this guy pops up multiple times in that 12.5 foot long image backdrop that I did for my friend John Miller. Now again, we're seeing multiple layers here. Starting out with the trees in the background, then I added this road, I added this building, I put a road out in front. This car was already in the image. I added these two things here, and added a little bit into the alleyway here. Another part of that long image, here's the auto parts store. This is done in layers again. Here's that brick image again. Added a few more cars here. This one actually came with the original image to this store. I didn't do much on this because it looked okay. Because it's about 3 feet away from any eyeball, most people won't notice the misspellings here. But this bothered me because it's right on a light background. This is supposed to be a supermarket, 1950s supermarket. Why it came up with that, I have no idea. And I thought, well, I can fix that easy in Photoshop. So I did this and I made it a butcher shop. And then I added this little, what do they call these, Easter eggs for John. People wouldn't normally see that, but he saw it when he put it together. And I thought, do you have Arby's out east? Because they, on their ads, they always say, we have the meats. And last year, late last year, I started using ChatGPT. Now, I use this for other reasons. That's why I subscribe to it. It costs $20 a month. But most of these online AI devices use virtually the same type of software and engines, so to speak. But since I first started with Microsoft Designer, AI has improved by leaps. You may have seen that on news stories that the AI is getting smarter and smarter and does more things. I asked ChatGPT to do an industrial railway corridor with brick buildings. And this is what printed out the first time. And I thought, wow, that looks nice. I said, they even made a decent looking steam locomotive. Some of them that I got on Microsoft Designer looked like they were designed by I don't know who. So I thought, oh, okay, that looks kind of neat. But instead of going to Photoshop this time, I said, remove that engine and the cars. It did. But take a look, watch the tops of the buildings here. Watch what disappears. It does make changes to other things too, so you really have to watch it. And I thought, I don't like that power pole, the power lines, smokestacks. Get rid of them. And that's all I had to do. I had to write that down, enter. In a matter of a few minutes, I got this. But look what it did to the sign now. Start screwing with that. And I thought, okay, I don't like those signs at all. Get rid of the signs. But look what it did to the tops of the buildings. And the sides. Oops. Go back and forth a little bit here. And what I did to this, and I still haven't used this on a layout because I've run out of backdrop. My layout's only so big. I've got about 80 lineal feet of backdrop images on my layout. And I can't expand the layout anymore. So I wanted this flattened out a little bit, and I did that in Photoshop. So now this can be used as a photo backdrop. But you can see AI generators still make mistakes. You know, how many tracks come together at a point like this? So you really have to watch your images. My suggestion, you want to get started doing this, you need to play around with it. I mean, I did this over a span of 20 years, and I'm still learning how things work on Photoshop, and AI is going faster than I can keep up. There's probably other things. I've seen a clinic recently where a guy actually animated a static scene on his layout. Unbelievable. And there's a software company or a website called Grok that will do that. And the guy models the Civil War, and he has all these images of Civil War soldiers in that, and he showed a short video of them marching. And it was really freaky. Thank you for your attention. I field any questions you have now.